Well, there you have the first verse of Hebrews chapter 13 on the screen. Not the shortest verse in the Bible, but it must be amongst the shortest.
Yeah.
Just the 1, 2, 3, 4 verses there. So coming into Hebrews chapter 13, you know, we've come from the heights of Sinai, the glorious prospect of heavenly Jerusalem that we were reading about in chapter 12. And we're now in this chapter brought down to earth because the whole chapter, as John mentioned before, is really to do with, in very practical terms, dealing with exhortation, the basic principles and precepts of Christian attitudes and living. In closing this epistle, you know, with this chapter, Paul actually focuses on the practical things. He makes a variety of quite brief statements relating to the basic Christian living. He also includes a warning against false teaching. Surprise, surprise. I don't think there are many epistles where Paul doesn't give warnings against false teaching. It was quite a big thing to him. But before doing this, he outlines, up until about verse 7, he outlines 5 essential qualities of the Christian faith. And those 5 essential qualities are love, which you see in the first verse here, brotherly love, continue, hospitality, sympathy for those who are in trouble, contentment, and in verse 7, respect. All quite important principles in themselves. These issues fairly quickly covered in the first 7 verses, either because they needed to be addressed in the church at the time, or simply because it's always beneficial to be reminded of these things, whatever the condition of the church might be. But the brevity of the references to them, which are really dwarfed by the previous lengthy expositions in the previous chapter concerning the laws through Moses and the errors of Judaism, it does indicate that those errors about the law, concerning the law and the errors of Judaism, they did have obviously an overriding importance in this epistle due to the amount of time that has been spent on them. And of course we have spent quite a bit of time looking at them and discussing them and the ramifications of them. So let's look at the first verse here. Let brotherly love continue. Previously, in chapter 6, verse 10, reference was made to, quote, your work and labour of love you have shown, ministering to the saints as you still do. So, in asking for brotherly love to continue doesn't mean it had stopped, but he's certainly advocating for it to continue. They had already obviously been showing love to each other, ministering as they did. Then in chapter 10, verse 24, Paul exhorted them, you remember, to let us consider one another to provoke unto love and good works. So now again in chapter 13, verse 1, for the third time, as it were, in this epistle, he's talking about love, and he's asking for brotherly love to continue. He says, let brotherly love continue, implying that's what love really wants to do. That's what God wants. God is the author, the originator of love, of course, and that is what he wants love to do. He wants it to continue. But for it to continue, we have to let it. And that's it's only a small point, but it's quite an important point, and it's significant to me in a way that it's the very first word that he uses about let brotherly love continue, implying, as we all know, we all have free will to stop it. We all have free will. We all have the ability to not let it continue. But if we stop it, it would have continued if we let it. In other words, there's never a good reason to let it stop. There's always very good reasons to let it continue. We have the freedom of choice to love or to hate. And the word let, I don't know if you've thought about this, but the word let occurs scores of times, probably hundreds of times in the Bible, not just relating to love, but relating to many, many different things, all of which we are called upon to let, to allow them, to permit for them to continue in the Christian life, which most of which, if not all of which, the flesh doesn't sometimes want to allow or prefers to not allow them to continue. So that is the challenge. Simple little challenge in the first verse is to let it. And the question is, who do we let? Who do we let control our life and control the love that we should be allowing to continue in our lives? Who do we give the green light to in our life? Do we give the green light to the flesh to hate, or do we give the green light to the Spirit to let love continue? There's actually, in chapter 10, somebody might like to read this, in Hebrews chapter 10, verse 22 to 24, there's 3 references in those verses to let us. Somebody like to read that? Hebrews 10, verse 22 to 24?
10, 22 to 24. Let us draw near with a true heart and full assurance of faith, having our hearts sprinkled from an evil conscience and our bodies washed with pure water. Let us hold fast the profession of our faith without wavering, for he is faithful that promised. And let us consider one another to provoke unto love and to good works.
That's just one of many examples where that expression, let us. Quite a good sort of an exhortation could actually be given just around that word, those words, let us. We know that lettuce is the main ingredient in a salad. And we know that there is a spiritual salad which, like the natural salad, consists of mainly lettuce, but also other things. And so in the spiritual salad, there are lots of very nice, very important ingredients, but the let us is probably the most important thing, because without that spirit, without that willingness to let, nothing virtually is going to happen. No. Reference to letting brotherly love continue, of course, reminds us of the love chapter in 1 Corinthians 13. Like in 1 Corinthians 13 verse 4, it says, love suffers long. You have length involved in a thing that continues. If a measurement continues, it's long. And love is the same. It's got to be long. It's got to continue. It's not to stop. Love continues to love for a long time, even when suffering. When we're tolerant, we may be tolerating a lack of love, but true love doesn't stop loving, even though it may not receive love in return. We so easily, it's a very natural thing to determine or to govern our love, or how long we'll show love, by how much love we get in return. And it's a natural and it's a very common thing when you may be showing love to somebody or in some way and you don't get it in return. It's very easy to not continue showing love. But the true spirit of love, governed by the grace of God, doesn't work that way. That way is a more sort of a legalistic way, you know, an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. You do that to me, I'll do that to you, sort of thing. But true love, true divine love, continues loving even when love is not being reciprocated, when it's not being given in return. And 1 Corinthians 13 verse 4 to 5 explains how we're able to have continuing love, because it says love is patient, and that is the thing. Sometimes you can be in a situation, in a relationship, all different kinds of relationships, but you can be in a relationship where love is not being reciprocated, but by being patient and by continuing steadfast and being nice, being kind and being loving, irrespective of not getting it in return, it can sometimes have very, very positive effects. And Paul says that love is patient. He says it's kind, it's not jealous, it's not boastful, it's not rude, it's not selfish, it's not easily provoked, and it doesn't think evil. I'm always challenged by that statement, love is not easily provoked, because the flesh is. The flesh is easily provoked. And we all know from experience, sometimes it doesn't take much of a provocation for us to just clam down and decide, well, we're not going to be kind anymore to that person, we're not going to show love to that person anymore. But so many stories, so many witnesses can be given where the love just continues to be shown and to be ministered, and it can in many cases break down hardness of heart and hardness of spirit. Verse 8 of that chapter says, love never fails. The true love of God, governed by grace, it never fails. Some translations say it never ends, which is the same thing. Verse 13 says love abides, it lasts. And that's why Paul is saying here, let it continue, because that's what the true love of God does. It lasts, it continues, it goes unabated, and even though it's provoked, it doesn't stop. It doesn't stop loving. And of course, what I'm sharing here can apply to love in a marriage between a husband and a wife. But Hebrews 13 verse 1 here is relating it to brothers, brotherly love. He's relating it to brethren. So he's applying it here to church members, which involves not just men, of course. The masculine word man or brother is often used, but it incorporates men and women. And it's interesting that the word love in 1 Corinthians 13, to start with, that I've been quoting, the word love there is agape, which basically means an act of the will, not based on emotion, not based on feeling. It's doing the right thing, whether you feel like it or not. Why? Because it's the right thing to do. It's a very powerful word in the Greek, because so often people's love is governed by feelings. You know, something's said or something's done that upsets you or that offends you, and so you don't feel like showing love. You don't feel like being kind or helpful. So you're not. You stop doing. But this love, this agape love, doesn't work like that. This agape love doesn't allow itself to be influenced by feelings or by emotions, even when its feelings are hurt. it continues to love and it continues to have the right attitude. But the Greek word in this verse here, in Hebrews 13, verse 1, it's not agape, it's Philadelphia, which means brotherly love. It has to do with basic kindness or tender affection. It's love on a more emotional level than agape, which, as I've said, doesn't depend on feelings or emotion. Now, both are important. Agape and Philadelphia, they're both important. But it is interesting to note that on all the occasions that Jesus used the word love, 40 of them were agape. Only 4 were phileo, which means tender affection. He never used the word Philadelphia. Quite interesting that. Incidentally, the Greek word Philadelphia used here in Hebrews 13 verse 1 only occurs 5 times in the New Testament. Jesus, of course, advocated love among his brethren, but he seems to have preferred to use agape. And you ask why? I think because it was this love, an act of the will, not a love governed by feelings, that enabled him to go to the cross. If he'd been governed by feelings and emotions, he wouldn't have gone to the cross because he didn't feel like it. We know he didn't feel like it because he said to God, he said, if possible, I'd like to avoid this. So he obviously didn't feel like it. And if he'd been governed by these other types of love, he wouldn't have gone to the cross. It was because he was governed by agape love, which ignores feelings and does the right thing, whether it feels like it or not, he would never have gone to the cross. So I would say, of all the different words translated love, agape is the most important. And it's the agape love that will be the root. It'll be the basis. It'll be the foundation of a lasting relationship. I'll tell you what, coming back to marriages, if more marriages had more of the agape love in them, they would have lasted. But because so many are based on feelings, just feelings and emotions, so many go down the gurgler. And that is the truth of it.
There must be the need, though, for like for a pure love to be a combination of all three.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh yes, I mean, it would be wrong to say that, we don't want emotion or we don't want feelings.
But those emotions should be governed by agape, shouldn't they?
Yeah.
You should have that.
Yeah.
I mean, it'd be a sad thing if everyone in the church, no one actually liked anybody, but you just, because of the church, I have to put up with them. Surely you must we need to find a connection with each other when we're sharing the truth and we're praising God together more than just, oh God, I have to put up with that person.
Having good feelings and emotions generated make love much more enjoyable. That's for sure. Yeah.
Philippians 2 is quite interesting. It says here, if therefore be any consolation in Christ, if any comfort of love, if any fellowship of the Spirit, if any affection and mercy, fulfilling my joy, being like-minded, having the same love, being of one accord and of one mind. Let nothing be done through selfish ambition or conceit, but in lowliness of mind, let each esteem each other better than himself. Boy, that's a toughie.
Yeah. It's a high
and then it goes on, let each of you look out not only for his own interests, but also the interests of others. And then again in verse 5 he says, let this mind be in you, which was in Christ.
Right.
So yeah, that really...
Yeah, that's a good verse,
Yeah.
that one. Quite powerful, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That Philadelphia you were talking about, Barry, has its root in a very similar Greek word, which you use the word kindness, and also has its root in a word which means fondness.
Right.
So that's another sort of aspect of it as well. So when we're talking about brotherly love, as you say, it's not just to be a mechanical thing. We're actually expected to be fond of each other.
Right.
And, you know, one of the ways that we can sort of generate that is to always remember the people in the church have been called by the Lord. You know, he has loved them enough to bring them into the church, to reveal himself to them, to forgive their sins. And if that's good enough for Jesus, it should be good enough for us, shouldn't
Right.
it? Even if different people don't necessarily fit our natural little box of people we may hang out with, you know.
It's interesting to consider this statement here in the context of the epistle to the Hebrews itself, knowing as we do some of the things that they were going through, some of the things that they were experiencing. You remember, we've seen previously how members of the church were coming under enormous pressure from fellow Jews, Judaizers, the followers of the law of Moses. And they were coming under pressure to abandon Christ, to abandon the church, and some of them had, and others were borderline, teetering on the edge, as it were, being swayed to leave Christ, leave the church, and go back to Judaism. And this was due to the fact, because remember, this church, the church of the Hebrew, it was at Jerusalem, which was the very nerve centre, the very heartbeat of Judaism, really. And of course, they were surrounded by Jews who hated Jesus, didn't believe he was the Messiah, they despised the church, and they were being persecuted by these Jews. We read earlier in chapter 10 that some of them were being imprisoned, some of them had their possessions confiscated. It would include their houses. They were being ostracised, treated very, very badly. They were going through really, really hard times. And you can imagine in the church, you would have families, and in these families, there would be the situation where a member of the family, or maybe some members of the family, have gone back to Judaism. And you can imagine how the Christians in that family would feel about members of their brothers, their sisters, their sons, their daughters, whoever, actually leaving the church, going back into Judaism. And you can imagine how easily that would create division, how it would create really bad feelings, hard feelings. And in such circumstances, it's so easy for the heart to become hardened by resentment and bitterness, and making it hard to love, to love those people who were your brothers, your sisters, your sons, or your daughters. You know, those who love the truth and who take it seriously and who zealously contend for it and defend it and protect it can so easily become intolerant towards those who forsake it, or those who might be bordering on forsaking it, and particularly have hard feelings towards those who are persecuting you for the truth to which you hold. But intolerance and lack of love towards such people doesn't help. It really doesn't help. It usually makes matters worse. And that's why Jesus said, love your enemies. Because he knew if you hate your enemies, it's not going to make it any better. It's actually going to make it worse. Love your enemies, bless those who curse you, do good to those who hate you, pray for those who despitefully use you. Totally foreign to human nature, totally foreign to the flesh. But there are so many testimonies that can be given of Christians who have adopted that attitude, who have actually in the end won the day and have actually converted those who hated them and who despised them. Because love is so powerful. Love is so powerful. Kindness is so powerful that it can break barriers in the end. But the opposite never will. Only make it worse. Unswerving love and loyalty for the truth is important, as we know. But it can, if we're not careful, it can generate a stern, harsh, rigorous, unloving attitude, which can make a difficult situation more difficult. And I'm reminded of that statement Jesus gave. You know, he was asked what the signs of his coming would be. And one of the signs he gave was that because of iniquity, the love of many will grow cold. And that's quite a challenging statement. Iniquity has to do with sin. It has to do with attitudes that are contrary to the love and the grace and the kindness of the Lord. And I know it's a common knowledge that it's very common in business for business people to become hard, because the world with which they're dealing is hard, and sometimes in dealing with that hardness, it can make you hard. And I think that's the warning of Jesus, is that as the world gets harder, and as maybe members of the church adopt a hardness of heart and an intolerance, and that we have to guard ourselves against becoming hardened by that, and to really strive to keep our hearts soft and humble and pliable. Well, unless anybody's got anything else to say about that first verse, we can go on to verse 2. Be not forgetful to entertain strangers, because some have entertained angels unawares. Fairly straightforward statement. I'll read it from a couple of modern translations. Revised Standard Version says, do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers. And the Good News says, remember to welcome strangers into your home. When it says entertain strangers, because angels have been entertained underwards, that word entertain doesn't mean inviting them into your house to do some tricks or play games or tell jokes. The word entertain probably gets used that way today, but that's not what it's meaning there. The Greek word is philonexia, which means to love. Philo is love, and nexia is hospitality. It means to love hospitality. And when it says to love hospitality, it means to be fond of it, to enjoy doing it. That word only occurs here and in Romans 12 verse 13, where we read, be given to hospitality. The word given there means to practice, or some say addicted. Be addicted to hospitality. And of course we do have examples in the Bible of hospitality. The first one that comes to my mind is in Genesis 18, where we read about these three men who visited Abraham, which some Trinitarians think was the Trinity, which it couldn't have been, of course, because the Bible says no man's ever seen God, so it can't have been God. And not only that, but the next chapter, Genesis 19, tells us that 2 of those men went on down to Sodom and stayed with Lot. And it specifically says they were angels. So nothing to do with a triune God. You've got to be fairly desperate to quote that verse to prove that. They were angels. But whether or not Abraham knew they were angels, I'm not sure, because he had, one of those 3 was a superior angel. We know angels do differ in rank, and one of them was superior, who Abraham addressed as Lord, and he was sort of the main spokesman. And we know that Abraham had entertained angel previously, and it could have been the same one. So he may have known that he was an angel anyway. And if he knew he was an angel, well, then you could easily assume the other 2 were as well. But having said that, some do seem to think that Abraham didn't know that they were angels, and that it was the first case, the first clear case of someone entertaining angels unawares. But it is certain that the 2 angels who went down to Sodom and stayed with Lot, he didn't know.
No.
Initially, he didn't know that they were angels. He saw them standing out in the square, the town square, in the marketplace, and it was getting late in the day, and he invited them to come home to his house, because he was very aware of how low the men of the city were, and of what might happen to these 2 men if they were stayed out in the street at night, not knowing, of course, they were angels and could look after themselves. But we know the story. He invited them into his house, and he soon discovered that they were angels, because the men of the city did come knocking on the door and asked for Lot to send those men out so that they could rape them. And these angels blinded the eyes. The men, they couldn't find the door to the house, so they had to go on their own way. Yes, you have Rahab. She entertained angels, the mortal kind. The spies, the 2 spies, they were messengers or angels. The same word is used of messengers, and she was very hospitable towards them, invited them in, and actually protected them, saved their lives really. And you have that rather nasty case in Judges 19 of that old man at Gibeah, and the Levite and his concubine were passing through, and he invited them to stay the night with him. And the men of the town came round, and they wanted to rape the man. And you all know the story. We won't go any further with that one, but the point is that the old man was hospitable, and you can't help but think that in a way it might have been better if he'd sent them on their way instead of. But I mean, he didn't know. It was out of the goodness of his heart that he invited them in. The New Testament, Jesus in Matthew 25 verse 35, he talked about how he was a stranger and he was taken in. And that's in that context where he said that not all who come before him and say, Lord, Lord, will actually be accepted by him, that he will in fact say to them, I never knew you. And it's in that context that he says that those that he will welcome and receive, he said, when I was in prison, you visited me. And he said, when I was a stranger, you took me in. And they said, when did we do that? When did we do that? He said, inasmuch as you did it to one of those who believe in me, you did it to me. And of course, the interesting thing, and this point has been made before, the interesting thing is that the Christians who did that, the Christians who visited fellow Christians that had been in prison for their faith and who welcomed in, who were hospitable towards Christians who needed lodging, they didn't do it like sort of as looking at Jesus and doing it for him to get some points. They weren't actually sort of thinking of doing it for Jesus. It was just their love for the brethren, and that's what impressed Jesus. That they did it. They did it as if they were doing it for him, but actually they were doing it for the brethren. And it's so easy to have wrong motives, isn't it? Wrong to have ulterior motives in doing things for the brethren, not because we really care about them, but because we're doing it to get posies from the Lord, and that's not good enough for him. Not good enough at all. Paul says in 1 Timothy 3 verse 2, an elder must be given to hospitality. That word given means addicted, prone or inclined, wanting to show hospitality. And Peter likewise, in his epistle, 1 Peter 4 verse 9, he says, exercise hospitality towards each other without grudging. Without grudging. That's important. I mean, I'm sure that many have had the experience where circumstances have demanded that you offer someone a bed for the night and you didn't really want to have to for whatever reason. And so you do it grudgingly. It's better not to do it grudgingly. It's better to do it out of love. That is thinking of them, not yourself. And thinking, well, now if I was in their situation, this is what I would like, and this is what I would appreciate. John, in his third epistle, 3 John verse 5, says, "Beloved, whatever you do to the brethren and to strangers, you are doing a faithful work," and that, of course, would include hospitality. The showing of hospitality, of course, was not a new thing under the new covenant. Even under the old covenant, the Mosaic covenant, Moses was encouraged by God to tell the people to love strangers and to be willing to be helpful to strangers and even to take strangers in if it was necessary, and that's what Rahab did. Rahab welcomed she welcomed the enemy. She welcomed the Israelites.
Do you think that's a bit of a strange statement, for the reason being the number of times we know in Scripture where people did entertain, angels, heavenly angels like Abraham? It's about sort of the only time, with the Lot incident. So you got thousands of years of biblical history and hardly any reference to someone actually entertaining angels unawares. So it's sort of like, well, why even mention that when hardly anybody is actually ever recorded entertaining angels unawares? Or do you think actually that it happens a lot more than what we may even realise, and when we get into the kingdom, we don't know who we might be kind to or whatever now, that the Lord will reveal, well, when you were hospitable to that person, I actually sent an angel to test you. Because to me, it seems a strange reason to be giving to entertain strangers when, only one or two people have ever entertained angels unawares. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I agree. I think there would be many, many examples if we only knew about them.
Yeah.
But as you said, it's unawares.
Yeah, that's right. It's true. That's the key word.
Because it's unawares, we don't know.
Yeah.
We're only told of a few examples, but don't be surprised when we get into the kingdom if we discover. I mean, we know that the city of God, which is our eternal home, is also the home of the angels, and we're going to be living together ultimately. And as we're walking around those gold streets, we're going to be bumping into angels, and don't be surprised, you know, if at least one comes and says, "Oh, you wouldn't remember me, but I was such and such and such and such at such and such a place. You remember?"
Yeah.
And you'll be thinking, "Oh, I remember that old man,
Yeah.
or that whatever."
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
Well, you know, because the Bible says a lot about angels, and it does talk about them watching over us.
Yeah.
That is the ministering spirit sent forth to minister on behalf of the heirs of salvation. That is their job, and we know there's a lot of them, because in Revelation we have a reference there to the angels. 10,000 times 10,000, that's 100 million.
Thousands of thousands.
100 million angels. And, you know, that statement of Jesus where he talks about not offending these little ones that believe in him because their angel stands in the presence of God. And I know many on that basis, and I could go along with it, believe that every believer has an angel, a specific angel, whose duty it is to watch over us. And that doesn't mean to say that we never ever get into trouble or that bad things don't happen. It's not that we know that bad things have to happen to test us, to develop us and mature us. And we'd just be spoilt little brats if everything was perfect in life. It's the difficult things and the trials that just show where you're really at. And the angels are there. In spite of what we might be going through, the angels, doesn't mean the angels not there, but that they're watching over us, and they have the last say in the matter. And we will get to meet. I believe that you know when the Bible talks about when Jesus returns, the angels are going to be sent out to gather up the elect, the believers, and I believe the angel that will come to us to take us to meet the Lord in the air, which I believe will be in the city of God, which is descending at the same time. I believe that angel will be the angel that has actually been watching over us.
Yeah, I believe that so. Manoah, Samson's father, had the same experience, didn't he?
Who?
Manoah, Samson's father.
Yeah. Yeah.
He had the same experience, and his wife had said, you know, a man of God spoke to me, said, I'm going to have a child. And it was interesting because she had seen this angel as in his bright countenance, which it talked about. But she said, oh, a man of God. So her husband took that to be perhaps a prophet. Or someone, a man of God. And it wasn't until he was preparing a meal, he wanted to prepare a meal for him, that he said, no, I will not eat with you, but put it on the altar there. And of course, the fire came and went up into heaven, and he ascended with it.
Right.
And it wasn't until that time that he knew he was an angel, because it actually states that Manoah did not know that it was an angel, just a man of God.
Was it them who got panicked because they thought they'd seen God?
Yeah, thought they'd be killed. Yeah.
Was it them?
I think so.
Because there was somebody else had a similar experience, wasn't there? An angel that touched the rock and fire came out and burned the sacrifice. Or was that them?
Yeah, I think that was them.
Yeah, but it was one or the other that they were terrified because they thought they'd seen God and they would die.
Yeah.
But they didn't understand. that it was an angel.
Bit irrational, like I guess we'd be freaked out the same sort of way, but a bit irrational when you think, well, they'd had all this conversation and interaction with this angel, and now that they've finally worked out it is an angel, they're scared they're going to get killed. Well, don't you think they would have killed you while you
Right.
were interact? You know,
Yeah.
so it was a bit irrational, but fear
Yeah.
can do that, can't it?
That's right.
Well, it truly demonstrates that, you know, not all angels have wings.
Yeah.
As they're depicted in so many pictures.
Right.
In fact, the only ones we know have wings are the seraphim and that.
It says, for some have entertained angels unawares. And as is so often the case, although we've got in one verse the same word, entertain, they're actually different Greek words. Some have entertained angels unaware. Entertain, that word there, enizo, is different from entertained in the same verse, but you usually have the same meaning, which is translated lodged elsewhere. It basically means being hospitable, whereas the other word means to love being hospitable. Not meaning, of course, that the second one doesn't mean love, but it's just interesting that, you know, with words, sometimes having basically the same meaning, but one having a bit more of a meaning than what another one has. So the reason given for being hospitable to strangers is because it could be an angel, and of course that, as you point out, John, adds to the incentive, the thought, the possibility, you know, of it being an angel would, you know, the old sinful, selfish flesh sometimes needs incentive, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But the statement clearly teaches angels can disguise their true identity. They can appear to be ordinary mortal men, but of course they can also, if they want to, they can also manifest themselves for what they are, as divine, powerful beings, by appearing in shining splendour, as they have from time to time. I think that when those angels came to Abraham and told him that Sarah was going to have a child, and she laughed, she was scornful about it. She obviously didn't know their true identity. I think if she'd known they were divine, angelic beings, I don't think she would have laughed.
Yeah.
I think she'd have been more believing. At time when Joshua was getting ready to embark upon his military crusades.
Are you for us or for the Lord?
Yeah, I don't think he initially knew he was entertaining an angel unawares at that time. So yeah, there are a few, and maybe others of that. Anyway, our time is up. So next time, God willing, we'll go into verse 3.